Hi everyone, Nora Crown here. For those of you who don't know me personally, I'm a violist in New York City, a writer, and a dystonia recovery advocate. And I'm so glad you're here with me to talk about my take on integrating mindfulness into your practicing and performing routine. I've been practicing mindfulness in the form of daily meditation, along with many other reflection and awareness-based practices for over a decade. And I have to say that becoming more mindful and self-compassionate has made me infinitely more content, resilient, and effective, both as a musician and as a human being. In this video, I'm going to share some concrete practices and processes that you can use to deepen your artistic awareness and focus, regain a sense of vitality and appreciation in your career, and even manage everyone's favorite issue, performance anxiety. Before we go any further, one thing that I want to emphasize is that the particular blend of experiences and knowledge that form the basis of my perspective is very personal. And while I've chosen to share things that I think will work for the broadest spectrum of people, some of what I share might work for you and some of it may not. Mindfulness, self-reflection, and even meditation are really umbrella terms for an enormous number of practices, philosophies, and traditions, some religious and some not, some old and some new, and you are really your own best guide as to what's effective for you and what you decide to let go. And please remember that as effective as it can be, no meditation program or mindfulness practice is a substitute for professional support if that's what suits you best right now. So, mindfulness. It's a word that we hear a lot these days, and I think it's important to define what it means to me. So meditation teacher Tara Brach describes mindfulness as having two components: noticing what is happening in the present moment and responding to that with a caring presence. And I'll say that again, especially because I think people often know about the first part, but not the second one. It's noticing what's happening in the present moment and then responding with a caring presence. So these two components are sometimes referred to as awareness and compassion, and they are most effective and maybe only ever really complete when used together. So, how do we go about integrating awareness and self-compassion into a practicing routine? Here's a step-by-step guide that I've put together. So when you're about to start your practice, I suggest you begin by putting away your electronic devices. Now, before you roll your eyes and close this video, I want to say, I get it. I am guilty of this just as much as anyone. And it's even harder if you use an iPad for reading music, right? But mindfulness really means becoming aware of where we are placing our attention so we can use it with intention. So minimizing distractions is almost always a good strategy. And it also turns the volume down on the hyperstimulation that we've all gotten accustomed to from having screens around all the time, which can have a negative effect on the nervous system. Next, take a minute to check in with yourself. It doesn't have to be a long time or complicated. In fact, we're going to try it out right now. So wherever you are, if it's safe to do so, just become aware of the feeling of your body. It's fine to close your eyes or focus them on the floor in a soft gaze, maybe 6 feet in front of you. Do you notice any places of obvious tension? If it's possible to do so, see if by noticing those places, you can invite them to relax just a little. You might notice the places of contact between your feet and the floor, or your seat and the chair. You might notice your breathing. And there's no need to change anything. We're just noticing. And you might ask yourself, how am I doing? How do I feel right now? Am I tired? Stressed? Impatient? Eager? Sad? Again, there's no need to change anything. We're just becoming a little more aware. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes if they were closed and come back to the video. So this is obviously a practice that you can use anytime you like if you find it useful. One thing I'll mention is that some people, particularly people who've been conditioned to be somewhat detached from their bodies because of trauma, can get overwhelmed by tuning into their physical sensations. And focusing on the breath in particular is not necessarily helpful for everyone. So if this practice is not right for you right now, that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with you. It just means that you might consider getting some one-on-one assistance from a qualified professional or a meditation teacher before continuing further. So after checking in with yourself, you can notice your surroundings. So often we're used to practicing wherever we find ourselves, and we don't really give ourselves a chance to even consider the environment that we're in. Is it quiet? Is it loud? Is it really bright? Is it kind of dim? What's the temperature? Does your clothing need to be adjusted to be more comfortable for playing? Make any doable changes and then just humbly acknowledge the rest. So, we've all been at rustic music festivals with no air conditioning or in a tiny apartment with city traffic buzzing outside, and it's all okay. So now it's time to take out the instrument. But before you just throw open the case mechanically and start tuning, just take an extra second. Can you see it as if for the first time? Pick it up, look at it, touch it, see if you notice something new. Can you remember how you felt the very first time you took your instrument out of your case? And can you imagine how you might feel if you knew it was the last time? I know I'm not trying to be morbid or overly sentimental here. It's just that we've all done these things so many times that we have a really hard time remembering what matters. And to me, that's one of the biggest benefits of mindfulness, is that it gives us that capacity to remember. Taking the time to go through these steps also sends a message of care to your nervous system that we're not in a rush and there's no one breathing down your neck ready to evaluate you. So lastly, from this more grounded place that we've established, you can ask yourself what your goals are for your practice today. And after you've considered what it is that you'd like to do, it's okay if you're not totally sure, just take a pause. Notice your breath and your body, your instrument, your space, and ask yourself what the best thing is to do right now. Often, and these days especially, I am quite often guilty of this, we launch into something, sometimes even at full tempo, without even giving our ear and body a chance to wake up. So here's something you can do instead. This is a form of an exercise I learned from pianist and coach Madeline Brucer called the Body and Sound Awareness Exercise. So starting very slowly, play just one sound at a time and see if you can feel that sound in your body. Now for some people this might feel totally familiar, but for me it was incredibly foreign. And that's quite often the case for those of us who rarely take our eyes off of written music. It seems unbelievably simple, but if you just really take the time to play one sound and really feel it before moving on to the next, it can have a surprising impact on the connection between the ear and the body, not to mention the amount of presence in your playing. So a few months after I started doing this, I realized totally by chance that I could suddenly play by ear, which I had always been terrible at before. Something about connecting the sound with my physical movements without that printed music as a go-between also helped me feel much more spontaneous and grounded and in control during performances. But we'll get to performing a little later in the video. After you've warmed up your ears and body, choose something to work on. And before you start, ask yourself what you'd like to explore or accomplish. And this part is important. Be open to a new response. See if something surprising jumps out at you from the page, especially if it's something you've played a million times. Mindfulness is partly about recovering a sense of immediacy, the moment-to-moment awareness that makes everything fresh and generates new insight. As you work, check in from time to time with how you're feeling. Is something uncomfortable or causing strain, either mental or physical? And is there anything you can do to alleviate that strain? At this point, I'll take a moment to mention that a lot of us feel uncomfortable, particularly physically, with our instruments. And in many cases, we've almost trained ourselves to ignore it, even to the point of injuring ourselves. And I just want to say that it really doesn't have to be this way. There is help available from somatic re-education specialists like Alexander Technique and Feldenkrais teachers, and from musicians who've done the tricky work of understanding playing mechanics and can guide us to a healthier way of using our bodies. If you find yourself getting distracted as you practice, just gently bring yourself back to the room, your body, the sound, and the process. Okay, so this is so important. Take breaks. and notice the effect that breaks have on your level of concentration. Also, consider your optimal practice schedule, which could vary based on the kind of work that you're doing and your life circumstances. Do you feel better practicing in the morning or the afternoon? Sometimes very short periods of practice scattered throughout the day can be much more effective than slogging through a multi-hour session. And sometimes all you've got is the half an hour before your baby wakes up from a nap, and that's okay too. When you feel satisfied with a section or that you've done the work that you can for right now, move on. One thing I was really surprised to learn about the brain is that it actually continues to work on what you've practiced after you've left it, and that the brain actually needs that time to cement the learning. So more practice is not better, it's just exhausting. If at any moment during your practice that you notice yourself drifting into maybe anxiety about the future or beating yourself up, just stop and see if you can hold that place inside yourself with kind attention. Is there a message it needs to hear from you? Like, I love you the way you are, or it's okay? Is it connected to a particular belief that you have? Like, oh, if I mess this up, I'm toast, or I'm a failure, or I'm not talented, or I'm not creative. And if so, would you be willing, just in this moment, to let that belief go? If not, or if it seems impossible, ask yourself how it serves you to hold on to that belief. So once I started doing this, I realized that I thought I was somehow required to feel badly about myself, that people would disapprove of me for not being appropriately ashamed of how little I had achieved as a musician. And once I decided that that was ridiculous, it actually became a lot easier to notice those voices, let them go, and move on to something much more productive than beating myself up. Okay, so the last vital element of a mindful practice routine is knowing when to stop. Many of us have been conditioned to completely override our body and brain's limits because we think there's some benefit to it. And I grant you, in some circumstances, that may be true. So if you have to play a show of totally unfamiliar music tomorrow, grinding it out just to get as much familiarity as you can might make some sense. But especially when we're after learning and progress that's more meaningful and durable, forcing the brain and body beyond their limit over time is not only destructive, it's also useless. The brain needs time to recover and work on what you've just learned. So go for a walk and get some ice cream. You'll thank me later. To expand on this, practicing is not just about time. So like many of us, I used to think that practicing was measured in hours, and for years my minimum was 3. And one day I told my husband that I'd practiced for 2 hours and 45 minutes that day. And he said, oh, so basically round down to 0 hours, right? And we laughed, but there was something to that. When we're mindlessly and joylessly slogging through our practice without a real understanding of what we're doing or effective tools, the only way we have of assessing our progress is by measuring the time that we've devoted. And we tend to lose track of why we're even doing what we're doing or what we're accomplishing during that time. So when you're ready to stop for the day, or just for now, notice how you feel. Frustrated? Satisfied? Tired? Honor yourself for taking the time to practice and commit to staying present as you move on to your next activity. So in this section of the video, I'm going to share my perspective on integrating mindfulness, that is, noticing what's happening in the present moment and responding from a place of care into your performing routine. Now, in some ways, the preparation for a performance starts as soon as the idea of the performance comes into your awareness. So when you accept a gig or you plan a show, first, check in with yourself. Are all parts of you on board with this? Why or why not? What kind of time or logistics might be involved? And how will this gig serve you? Notice what arises. Anxiety, excitement, gratitude, dread. Just notice. Then, in the weeks and days leading up to the event, what happens when thoughts of the performance arise? Take a moment to check in with yourself the way we did prior to starting the practice routine, by feeling your body, noticing your breath, and any emotions that may be present. See if you can observe the content of your thoughts without getting involved with them, just with a sense of curiosity. If anxiety or stress arise, see if you can just set aside the thoughts fueling that emotion for a moment. Admittedly, this can be easier said than done. That's why they call mindfulness a practice. So stop and feel your feet on the ground. You may even consider sitting down, taking a moment to focus on the sensations of contact between your feet and the ground and your seat with the chair. If it feels okay to you, you can put a hand on your heart and offer yourself a genuine message of care. You don't have to share it with anyone. It can be whatever message of reassurance lands for you in that moment. Later, when you feel calmer, you can consider coming back to those anxious or stressful thoughts with an attitude of curiosity. What's going on in there? Notice what you notice, and without fighting it, ask yourself, do I really know those things are true? How does it make me feel to believe them? What would it be like to let them go? Could I just imagine it, even if it doesn't seem possible? And be open to being surprised. Okay, so we all know that the hours and minutes right before a performance are a very special time. And I'd like to share some tools that have helped me weather those periods with a little less anguish and a little more courage. This first tool is adapted from a practice known as the Performing Beyond Fear exercise, which I learned through years of study with pianist and coach Madeline Bruiser. You can find the original exercise on her website, www.artofpracticing.com. This will be a slightly condensed version. So let's give it a try. Sit down and close your eyes. If you'd like, feel free to think of a particular performance that you have coming up, or maybe just all the performances ahead of you in life. And first of all, just take a moment to appreciate yourself. Just try. The appreciation can take many forms. You could consider how hard you've worked for this particular performance, or just to gain the skills and experiences that have made you the musician that you are. And maybe even more importantly, you can acknowledge that this devotion and effort is a sign of your care, of how much you want to communicate. That care and love alone are evidence that you are worthy of the music you want to create. That's enough. You are enough. Next, without jumping straight to a response, ask yourself what your deepest intention is for the performance. Even seemingly unimportant or not very profound performances can offer us opportunities to connect with something deeper than just collecting a paycheck, getting through something without embarrassing ourselves, or making it to the next round. And it can be surprising what we uncover when we allow our minds and hearts to really open and we ask ourselves the question, who are these people who are going to be hearing me? And what could I offer them? So give yourself the chance to reflect on these questions for a moment. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So I actually did this exercise right before an orchestra audition, and I found that underneath the pretty obvious wish to get the committee's approval, I actually wanted to give them the joy of being able to hear something beautiful as if for the first time, even though they'd probably heard the same excerpts more than a dozen times that day. And even though I was terrified, connecting with something deeper than the immediate outcome gave me the courage that I needed to play my best, and I ultimately succeeded at the audition. One student I worked with did this exercise before a recital, and she said, "It's like I remembered what I'm playing for." It's a really powerful exercise, and all credit goes to Madeline Bruiser for developing it. So here's another tool you might find useful. On the day of the performance, or perhaps in the minutes before you walk on stage, if you find yourself getting swept up in anxious or distracting thoughts or feeling overwhelmed by physical sensations, see if you can come back to your feeling of your feet on the ground or your seat in the chair if you're seated. Look around, move your head and neck, and notice what you're seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. This is a grounding technique I learned from stress and trauma researcher Elizabeth Stanley, and it's designed to help shift the brain and nervous system out of a fight or flight response to a more regulated state. Obviously, you can use this anytime in life when you notice stress and anxiety. Okay, in the moment of performance itself, simple is usually best. See how deeply you can remain connected to two things: the sound of your instrument and the feeling of your body. When the mind starts to spin off into unhelpful chatter, gently pull it back to your body and the sound. Again, this will be easier if you've already done it a lot during practice. It will probably get pulled away over and over again. And that's fine. Whenever you notice thinking, judging, worrying, anticipating, whatever, just drop it and come back. When the performance is over, see if you can take in the audience's applause. Really notice the expressions on their faces and on the faces of your fellow performers. Notice how you feel without judgment. Relieved? Exhilarated? Disappointed? Maybe a lot of different things. Whatever you feel, can you allow yourself one moment of appreciation for the audience who listened to you, for the music, and most of all, for yourself, for having the courage and dedication to get on stage and share yourself with others? So those are my tips for integrating mindfulness into your practicing and performing routine. I hope you found them useful. Really, we've barely scratched the surface on what mindfulness is and how it can benefit your musicianship and overall quality of life. So I hope you consider this an invitation to continue exploring, following your own curiosity and inner guidance, and to keep on becoming the musician and person you're meant to be. Thank you so much. Take care.